everyone, my name is Lauren and welcome to another video from the Tiny Menagerie. For the most part, Neocaridina are a really simple species to care for, and once they're used to your water and the colony is getting established and breeding, then they practically look after themselves, needing little more than a little bit of food every now and then. But, like everything, they do suffer from some parasites, and one of the most common ones you are going to come across is likely to be Scutellaria Japonica. And this is because this fascinating little hitchhiker is very common in the shrimp hobby nowadays due to an influx of imported shrimps coming in to fill the massively surging demand for them in the hobby. That, and the fact that they don't actually cause the shrimp much harm when they're in small numbers, and so getting rid of them really isn't an important priority for the wholesalers. But what actually are Scutellaria and why are they a problem? Well, they are a type of worm, specifically a tubularian flatworm, which is a type of worm that has a suction cup on one end which it uses to attach itself onto the host shrimp, usually around the rostrum, and from there it extends feeding threads through the shrimp's carapace into the fleshy epidermis and around the gills, and then extends finger-like appendages up into the water column in order to harvest supplemental nutrients. Make no mistake though, the majority of the Scutellaria's food is coming from the plasma of the shrimp, that is the fluids that surround the shrimp's cells on the inside of the exoskeleton. Which sounds absolutely horrendous, and it is, but in very small numbers they don't really bother the shrimp. It's a bit like a tick on a deer. They're an annoyance, but the animal can cope with this. Where Scutellaria become a problem is that in our richly fed, highly stocked tanks, these worms have more than enough food, and so they can rapidly increase in number until they leave your shrimp looking like they've grown a full beard. At which point they are now a serious problem for the shrimp, because they're not only robbing it of more and more body fluid, they're also hampering its ability to feed, they're hampering its ability to move around, and they can even disrupt the molting process. And all of this of course causes stress for the shrimp, and if it is one thing these guys don't like, it is stress. They like to be pampered, not pressured. But where did these Scutellaria come from in the first place? Now, something that I see time and time again is this idea that Scutellaria are a product of poor management or bad water conditions, that it's your fault for not keeping that tank scrupulously clean, which clearly isn't the case. While I have no doubt that one day, many billions of years ago, life did miraculously and spontaneously occur in a warm soup of dirty water somewhere on this planet, that is highly unlikely to have happened in someone's fish tank. And so, if you have Scutellaria, then it is a case that you will have brought them in, and that is very, very easy to do. Because when they're in their immature state just after hatching, they are borderline microscopic, and they can be attached to any wet matter at all. This can be new plants or new wood. But by far the easiest way to end up with Scutellaria is that they simply came on any new shrimp that you bought. They were already hitchhikers on board. And now that you've spotted them though, you need to decide what you're going to do about them. Obviously they can't stay, as they are going to be a constant source of nuisance for your shrimp, but luckily there are a couple of options that you have when it comes to treating them. And first, and perhaps the most obvious method, is to use a generic flatworm killer. These are very easy to come by online and could include products like No Planaria, for example, which is marketed very much at getting rid of planaria, funnily enough, which are very much more aggressive flatworms. They are an active hunter of shrimp and something you need to eradicate as soon as you come across them. But even products intended for use in other animals like fenbendazole, which is a tapeworm killer used for dogs, any of these will kill Scutellaria, usually within 1 to 2 doses, which makes them very, very convenient. But they are highly, highly toxic compounds, and they are completely indiscriminate, meaning they will kill any other worms, or often even any of the snails that you have in your tank along with the Scutellaria, which is perfect if you're running a sterile shrimp breeding operation, for example, and you just want your stock parasite-free. But if you have a lovingly nurtured micro-ecosystem style tank that is full of snails and copepods and infusoria and limpets and detritus worms and all those other lovely things, then the last thing you're going to want to do is throw a chemical bomb into your tank. That is absolutely guaranteed to upset the balance and undo all of your hard work. And so you're going to need to be much, much more specific about treating your shrimp, and the easiest way to do this by far is simply with salt. And it's important to use aquarium salt rather than table salt, which tends to have been treated with anti-caking substances such as ferrocyanide, or it's been fortified with iodine, neither of which is going to be good for shrimp. So be sure to use either marine or aquarium salt. All types of worms, though, are incredibly susceptible to killing with salt, because their very porous bodies easily osmose water away to the point where they will dehydrate to death. Shrimp, on the other hand, much like you and me, have a tough coating on their body. They have a cuticle, or their shells, whereas we of course have oily skin, both of which give us much more protection against salt compared to a hapless flatworm. And so, in order to treat the planaria, you can quite literally pick out each infected shrimp individually and give it its own very personal spa treatment. To prepare a salt bath for them, you just need to mix 1 tablespoon of aquarium salt, add it into a mug of the aquarium water, and then just stir it until it's dissolved. You don't need to worry about the salinity of the mixture. So long as it tastes salty to you, then it's going to be quite toxic to a flatworm. Then simply catch your Trojan shrimp and dip him in the water. Shrimp are very tolerant of salt, and you can leave them in there for a good minute or two. I in fact have a small marine tank, and to treat my shrimp, I often leave them suspended in there for a good 10 minutes at a time. Simply because the salinity is quite low in a marine tank, and I want to make sure it has plenty of time to really melt those worms off. Be sure to keep an eye on any shrimp that you're dipping, just to make sure that if they're showing any signs of distress, such as trying to climb out of the water, swimming rapidly round in circles, or worse, not moving at all, then you're on hand to quickly put them back in their home aquarium, regardless of whether the Scutellaria are gone or not yet. Personally though, I find my shrimp seem fairly happy in a balmy 25 degrees of salt water, and while they are there, it will melt the Scutellaria clean off them, leaving behind just that very sticky little suction cup that they have. If you can see a stub of worm left on the shrimp, then it needs a longer dip, because that will grow back into a full worm. But if it's just a dot that's stuck on the side of the carapace, then that won't grow back as the body of the worm has gone. It's just left its anchor point behind. But, as I'm sure you can tell, while this is the easiest of methods, it is certainly not the fastest, and if you have many tanks like me with several hundred shrimp spread between them, then it's likely that using the salt method is never really going to be able to eradicate all of the Scutellaria completely, simply because you won't have time to catch and dip every shrimp. There will always be individuals in there that you've missed, and just when you're fairly certain you've finally managed to get rid of it all, some little individual is going to come crawling out of the woodwork doing a fine impression of Santa Claus. And so, if you're like me and you're not selling shrimp and have no intention of starting selling shrimp, and if you really don't want to resort to chemical warfare in your tank, then you will likely have to enter into a sort of truce with the Scutellaria. I accept that it exists in my tanks. I'm never going to get rid of it completely. But so long as the shrimp are breeding and they look like they're okay, then I'll assume they're not under too much extra burden. And I will just dip individual shrimps as often as I can, and slowly, hopefully, the Scutellaria numbers will fall and it will stay consistently very low, which, in all honesty, is good enough for me. And for the past 4 months, me and the shrimp have been working like this, and they've done well, and they've kept on breeding, and I haven't had deaths or anything like that. And so far, it seems to be working, although only time will tell if the Scutellaria is ever going to disappear completely. But overall, Scutellaria japonica are an annoying infestation that is almost an inevitable part of keeping shrimp these days. They are incredibly common in the hobby, and how you choose to tackle them will likely depend on your personal setup. And just to point out, if I didn't have natural tanks, I would 100% just use no planaria, because salt dipping is a pain. Anywho though, I hope you've enjoyed this little video all about Scutellaria japonica. Happy fish keeping everyone, and I will see you again soon. Bye bye!